in the chat. Let's see, click on continue. Okay, a circle in the fire. Started at about the time I was, 53, born in 1954, honored considerably in 1955. I rather suspect that this is one of those situations in which people who give prizes were getting turned on to O'Connor because of certain works that she was publishing. And then they were looking for the next thing that was going to come out that they could give the prize to. A Circle in the Fire got big awards. Not A Good Man Is Hard to Find, not Good Country People, not some other stories I consider major O'Connor, but this one did. We mentioned last month when we were talking about A Temple of the Holy Ghost that this story was written at about the same time. And so, you know, you were encouraged to figure out what difference that makes, what that tells you that these two stories were written at about the same time. If anybody's got a bright idea about how the pine tree that Sally Virginia Cope has her face smashed against, how that image at the end of this story connects with the little girl in the Temple of the Holy Ghost having her face smashed up against the crucifix that's attached to the nun at the end of A Temple of the Holy Ghost. There's bound to be a wonderful comment to make about that. I just don't know that I've come up with it for this week. I thought I would start with the opening sentence of the story. I'll just read one sentence. And it's a sentence that I have usually rather glided over considering this story, but I thought I'd make a big deal of it today. Sometimes the last line of trees was a solid gray-blue wall, a little darker than the sky. But this afternoon, it was almost black, and behind it, the sky was a livid, glaring white. What's that got to do with anything? I would say this is kind of an authoritative voice that's giving us this sentence. And it doesn't say which of the two situations is the right one. It just says sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's another way. Sometimes things are clearly separate, opposite, black and white. Sometimes they're very similar and you can hardly tell them apart. Well, I think you can say that this is a comment that you can apply to various things in the story that we're about to get. One of those is gender. Sometimes gender roles are polarized, and then other times it's very ambiguous. The story happens to have one of O'Connor's drag scenes where the little girl dresses up as a little boy and she's ready to go out and be a cowboy and take over the world. And the story doesn't quite tell us how to feel about that, but it kind of shoves it in our faces. The next sentence, I'm going to make a big deal of this too. The next sentence has nothing to do with what the trees look like. I guess if we read enough Flannery O'Connor, we are not put off. We are not shocked that somebody would go from a sentence about trees to the next sentence of this story. You know that woman that had that baby in that iron lung, Mrs. Pritchard said. This is some people remember which story this is by saying, oh, it's the story that starts off with the talk about the iron lung. Not everybody remembers what an iron lung is. And I don't know as much about iron lungs as I would like to know. I grew up with the notion that an iron lung was a machine that they stuck you in if you got polio. and it made you breathe. And this may be mythology, but my assumption always was that once you went into an iron lung, you stayed in the iron lung. Nobody ever managed to get out of an iron lung. You didn't recover from that situation that put you there and start breathing well on your own. Now, I don't know if that's true. It may be that lots of people recovered and had treatment through an iron lung. Anybody want to comment on that?
Bruce, I did a Google search right before our friend Google, and I looked up iron lung women giving birth. And evidently there were quite a few women who gave birth. And one I saw in Time magazine from 1940. And it did say that some of the ones where the women gave birth, they would put them on oxygen while they were giving birth. And some births were live, some as this woman would die. So.
Well, how about that?
I'm also looking at Google, and I'm seeing that a polio patient with a paralyzed diaphragm would typically spend 2 weeks inside an iron lung while recovering. So
that people would come out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the story is kind of using the mythology about an iron lung being something you were sentenced to for forever. So that the idea that this woman could give birth in an iron lung is this impossibility. It's this miracle. And even if it does show up as something that really happened, and that Flannery probably knew really happened, Mrs. Pritchard treats this as, kind of extremely strange, almost impossible. She's taking it seriously, because she's distantly related to the woman who gave birth in the iron lung. Now, what I felt like making of this today, when I was reviewing the story this time around for this meeting, was that it's an image of entrapment, of confinement. And it's an important image for the rest of the story. I would say the women in the story are all stuck in an iron lung of a sort. They are trapped. And it would be, they kind of feel as if it's just nearly impossible to get out of this situation. I haven't been able to stumble across the book I have that goes on for pages and pages and pages about the woman giving birth to an iron lung as a mythological reference. Much can be made of the child born from the iron lung, but I thought I would just hint at it. I could look that up. Seal, that's her name, Cynthia Seal, wrote a book about O'Connor, and she does more with this story than anybody else ever has, but it's very psychological and mythological, and I thought that's not the major direction that I'm going to go with today, but more you could do. Okay, another idea. This is a story that is just about as tied to Andalusia Farm as any story is. Okay, you go to the farm, you see the water tower in back of the house, you look at the landscape, and you can easily imagine everything that's happening in the story happening on the farm. Oh, by the way, we do have a youth prison. I forget what we call it nowadays. We do have a youth prison on the west side of town, and I would imagine that when folks escaped from the youth prison on the west side of Milledgeville and they started running for it, they would be likely to end up on Andalusia or other places nearby. And so the story might have something to do with, a real story from from sometime in the past. There are still signs. I don't know if I don't think they've all been taken down. There, a few years ago, there were lots of signs still around at Andalusia Farm warning you against fire. I think it was probably something Regina O'Connor worried about a lot. A few years ago, when they were doing cleanup on the barn and going through stuff that was basically considered trash and just pushed over in the corners, they found something that we put on the cover of the Flannery O'Connor Review back in 2015, a fire bucket. In case you don't know what to use when a fire starts, we write the word fire in big red letters on the side of the bucket. I find that just totally charming. And I think there are indications that Regina O'Connor was very nervous about the possibility that the serious damage could be done to Andalusia if people weren't careful with their cigarettes, for example. Let me match with, Chan's got a comment. You want to unmute Chan? You're still mute. There.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted.
I just wanted to add more to the fire. What you were talking about, Regina being afraid of fire, brought several things to mind. It post-dates the story, but there was a beloved woman in Milledgeville who discovered on her farm a patch of marijuana that people had planted. And she reported it. Well, first she had to get the county extension agent to identify it, and she reported it. And her house was burned down shortly after. And people helped, and she rebuilt her house. And the second house was burned down. And when she died, she was living in the third very small little house that people had come together and built for her. My grandmother, who was a contemporary of Regina, lived out in the country on a farm by herself. And she leased her woods to a hunting club, not because she really wanted to, but because they were going to do it anyway. And if she tried to keep them off, she was afraid they would burn her house down. So it was a very common fear, not only from lightning storms, which were frequent, but from malevolence of people who got mad at you.
Thank you.
As happens in this.
That's relevant. I think that is totally relevant to the story for some of what we'll be talking about in a minute, about what in the world is happening at the end of this story. I'm trying not to get there. Right away. Thank you, Chan. When you're thinking about the story as having something to do with Andalusia and the local here, I would also suggest to you that you should call to your, bring into your mind your whatever picture you have of the childhood home in Savannah. Mary Flannery gets up in the morning and she walks into her parents' bedroom, the only other room on that floor of the house, and looks out the front window of a very small house that they live in Savannah. What she sees outside the window in her childhood is not the lovely Lafayette Square that we have now in touristy downtown Savannah. She sees, the big Catholic church that's, kind of dominating the square is there, of course. But the space is a big playground without all those trees. And it's a place where little boys play and where little girls like Flannery do not go even if they have a mother that would allow it. And I imagine Regina would never have allowed it, no matter what the rules were. But Flannery grew up with the notion that she was confined to the house and she could go out and look out the window in front of her house and see that the boys get to do everything. And she has to stay stuck. It seems to me this is a story about confinement and maybe feeling threatened by what those boys are doing out there. Where shall we go next? I have from time to time asked people here in Milledgeville, what are the local habits? I mean, there are people in this group who could answer this question. What are the local habits if somebody you don't know very well at all just arrives at your house uninvited? How hospitable are you to them? Does Southern hospitality mean much of anything? When I read criticism about this story, I regularly read that Mrs. Cope is terribly stingy. When the three little boys from Atlanta, they haven't escaped from the local prison, they've come from Atlanta, but when they show up, she gives them something to drink and she gives them something to eat, and then she goes back into the house and she gives them sandwiches. And I have read in criticism often that she's just mean and stingy and she's not giving them anything. And I've always thought that was a little questionable. And I've, kind of asked a few times in front of groups like this, does that seem stingy or does that seem generous? And most of the time the answer I get is, oh, that seems plenty generous. That, lots of people say, you're not under any obligation to offer these food gifts just because somebody walks up to the house unannounced. It's I think a reasonable question to ask about the story because Mrs. Cope's reactions to the boys, that's a lot of what this story is about. And I also think that this is a story about the relationship between the mother and the daughter, Mrs. Cope and Sally Virginia Cope. And one of the patterns that I see in this story, this is my hobby horse I call the substitute child theme, is that it seems to me from the point of view of Sally Virginia, the little girl, her mama is being way too nice to these bad little boys. She's nicer to them than she should be, and she's not nearly as nice as she should be to Sally Virginia. And Sally Virginia is pretty upset, and maybe justifiably so, because she thinks that Mama is trying to prove something. Oh, look how nice I can be. I'm wonderful and generous and giving, and it proves I'm really a great mother, even though you complain about me all the time, Sally Virginia. I mean, it seems to me that's part of the unspoken message of that situation. And of course, this reading I want to attach to the story all falls apart if Mrs. Cope really is terribly stingy when the boys show up. I mean, I guess she could be stingy and the daughter not realize it, and the daughter be the only one who thinks that she's being generous. But that's set up for one of the issues in the story. What's the relationship between the mother and the child, and how is that going to work itself out? More on that later. Let's do a few minutes on name symbolism. People don't do name symbolism all that much with this story compared to other O'Connor stories, but there are some things to say, okay? And everybody comments on the name cope as a verb. Mrs. Cope is trying to cope. She's struggling to cope. She does everything to try to cope, to keep control of the situation on this farm. She's always looking to what else she can do in order to cope. Okay. A cope is also a noun. It's a piece of clothing worn by a church authority figure. What if Mrs. Cope is carrying the aura of that much authority? What if she is the authority figure against whom everybody else is rebelling? And I think the boys rebel, Sally Virginia rebels, everybody works on the farm, and all rebel against Mrs. Cope. It's her against the world of the farm and the world of the visitors. What if that's got a little religious implication there? The three little boys who come from Atlanta, we're told their names. The main one, the one who used to live on the farm, is Howell Boyd, a name that doesn't do a whole lot for me. What seems significant is that he tells Mrs. Cope that he's not his brother, because she gets confused. And so he gets to say, I'm not JC, my brother. Well, you don't have to be searching too much to with the intricacies of name symbolism to make something out of that. He's saying, I am not the savior here. I'm going to be somebody else. I'm going to be a little more trouble to you than that. The largest and oldest of the three boys explains to Mrs. Cope, she makes a mistake, I guess, that his name is Garfield, not Ashfield. Okay, if you've been reading your O'Connor, if you've been rereading your O'Connor, you know that there's significance to the name Ashfield. And Flannery, I guess, is kind of asking us, think about how this story relates to another story I wrote. It's in the same collection, Good Man is Hard to Find in Other Stories. The little boy in the river is named Harry/Bevel Ashfield, a little boy who lives in the city and gets introduced to the country, and he decides that the country is where it's at. It's paradise. It's so wonderful. He should go there and drown himself in the river at the end of that story, because that's the way to get to heaven. Think about how little Harry Bevel Ashfield is like the three little boys in this story. How significant is the connection between those? And when Garfield explains that he's not Ashfield, he's really probably explaining that he is kind of like Ashfield, as we know somebody named Ashfield in the stories of Flannery O'Connor. Where next? One of the people who occasionally drops in on these book club meetings, and I'm wondering if he'll show up today, is Brent House. And if he's not here, I can just talk about him. Tell the story of Brent House, and it relates to this story. Brent was in the first class I taught on a Flannery O'Connor at Georgia College. Shortly after I got this t-shirt here in 2003 for the first O'Connor conference I helped out with, I was teaching a course on Flannery O'Connor for the first time with people who were really primed to take it. And I can't remember if it was in that class or one of the years shortly after that, but here appears Brent House, an MFA student in our creative writing program here at Georgia College. And he comes to class and he announces that the reason he's taking the Flannery O'Connor course is that he is an agrarian. And he wants to become more sophisticated in his agrarianism. And and he figured that reading Flannery O'Connor would make him a better agrarian. And that was, that outlook on farming and the South and being anti-industrial and loving farms. These were major commitments for Brent. Then he started reading the stories of Flannery O'Connor. And it may not have been this particular story, but there was a night that I remember that Brent came to class and was almost in tears. He felt betrayed by Flannery. He said, she hates farms. She wants them all to be destroyed. I mean, and you can make that case. You can look at this story, you know, maybe the happy endings that were burning down Andalusia. The displaced person doesn't exactly give you a positive view of, you know, life on the farm as the way to go. And so here was somebody who showed up trying to be converted to loving rural life even more through the fiction of Flannery O'Connor. And what he found was he thought just the opposite. And I didn't take any particular stand on that issue when Brent was bringing it up. I was just fascinated. Tell me more, Brent, about how you feel about all these things. And it's a question to ask. You know, and I would say for a lot of people that we start off reading Flannery O'Connor thinking that she is pro-country, pro-farm, and then she gives us situations and you know, plot lines that make us wonder whether this is really so great. Now, I resist the conclusion that she totally hates farms and she considers them totally evil from outside the text. You know, she can't be a writer without the farm. You know, the farm is paying for her medicine. The farm is paying the bills so that she can live this artist colony life where she does basically whatever she feels like doing every day. And mother's over there doing all the work to run the farm and pay the bills. It would seem really quite ungracious of Flannery if she were totally arguing that there's no way for a farm to be a good thing. So I guess I'm not as depressed by O'Connor's farm stories as I remember Brent being. You know, if Brent shows up in one of these meetings one day and I ask him about it, he may tell me that I have mythologized everything he told me. But I think it's a good question. Okay, where shall we go next? How about, who are these little boys? They don't seem to have a lot of personality. There doesn't seem to be that much difference between them. We're told that they don't agree with each other, but it's kind of black and white, cut and dried. You know, it seems like, to me, I'm inclined to read them as three versions of the same person with three different names and slightly different, you know, attitudes towards this and that. I don't think that this is deep psychological analysis that's going on in this story with these three characters. The deep psychology, that's what you apply to the female characters, not to these boys. I would say they're a little unreal. Sometimes when I think about OT and ET, the Greenleaf boys in the story of Greenleaf, I think they're kind of like these characters. You know, they're there, but these are like triplets to go with those twins in that other story, and we don't need to think about them as particularly different from each other. They're just parts of the same outlook. I ask people to put in writing what they think of these stories on a regular basis. You know, every student in my class has to do a lot of that. And I regularly read that people look at the three little boys and they see them as symbols of evil. And I think, well, okay, it's possible to get through the whole story and think they're bad, bad, bad. But I think it's more complicated than that. I don't think that's the whole story. I'm more intrigued by the possibility that I have heard from a few people that they are trickster figures. Not particularly good, not particularly bad, just these forces of energy that love to blow up the system, to blow up the world, whatever it is. They're just going to delight in making trouble. And there is a whole book about trickster figures in Flannery O'Connor that, makes you believe that lots of tricksters are floating around in O'Connor, and it's not even quite appropriate to ask whether they're nice people or bad people. They're trickster figures. They're people who cause trouble, exist to do that.
Bruce?
Yes.
One of the things that strikes me is I buy this trickster figure idea, but also Powell, the one who had lived on the farm, he seems, there's a sadness about him. He's got some more rounding than the other boys do.
Oh yeah, if there's any rounding, it's in him. And I had to check again after I finished reviewing the story. I asked myself, now, which one of them was it who said, who had the idea that they should burn the place down? And it seems to me the answer is it's Powell, the one who has mythologized it and who's made it into paradise and has been dreaming about coming back here. He's prodded a little bit by the older kid to say, we could build a parking lot. But he's the one who pulls out matches and gets the other two to pull out their matches too, as if it's his idea. Let's set a fire. Wouldn't that be just a whole lot of fun? So I think
we have someone wanting to talk.
Yeah.
First,
Okay.
iPad 3, who's our new person.
Yeah.
You need to unmute yourself though.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Who is this?
I forgot her name. She said she was
Okay.
new to
Yeah,
us.
there we
she
go.
is.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
This is Jackie Bryan. And I'd like to take this a step back when we're talking about the three women, because these little boys, to me, are really just an extension of these three women.
Ooh, let's hear that.
That is really Powell is very much like Mrs. Cope, giving and very understanding. It was really Mrs. Pritchard who was the one who encouraged her to feed the boys. It wasn't Mrs. Cope who came out and said, oh, let's feed the boys and let's take care of them. She had to have some encouraging to get this done. And then, of course, the daughter, who is always in the background, who has this underlining, almost shadow aspect to her. She is not going to conform at all. But with the three women, you combine those personalities of the three women, and they're almost like one whole person. Mm-hmm. And you get that same aspect with these young boys. Mm-hmm. It is almost as if these young boys are an aspect of the women's unlived life. That part of women at that time who didn't have the luxury of strolling down the dirt road or hopping on the back of a pickup truck out for an adventure. So when you say that Powell is the one that brings out the matches, that is an expression of her own fear and what holds her and binds her to this property. And how is she going to be set free? By burning it down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my train of thought through this whole process. These little boys are just this aspect of those three women that have come out to be liberated. They're both suffering, the three boys
They're
and the
miserable.
three women. They are both miserable. They're both suffering. They have no breath in life. They don't breathe life. Life is almost artificial to them, like that iron lung. So how do you escape from all this? And I'm so sorry to interrupt what
No, you're fine. Yeah. Okay. And so one of the things I would say about the story, it's on somewhere down my list of things to say, is that Mrs. Cope could stop these boys at any point.
Mhm.
Yes, she could.
And she doesn't, leading to the possibility that I think you're suggesting that she wants to blow the world up. She wants to be overthrown. She wants to see something wild happen. She wants these
Right.
what they're going to do. I can also buy that the three female characters can be read as aspects of the same personality. O'Connor plays this game all the time. You know, their stories, Everything That Rises Must Converge is probably the best example, where everybody is a double of everybody else. More in common than they realize. And so why not have triplets, you know, as well as twins all over the place.
I think Chan also has a comment to make.
Yeah, Chan.
I was wondering if you would consider this a prequel to A Good Man Is Hard to Find.
In what sense?
Well, didn't the misfit have two compatriots with him?
Oh, sure.
and
So these are this is their tryout for their.
And he was the leader of the
leader.
gang.
Yeah, they'll join up and
We don't see him murder the family, but we see him murder the old woman, and he seems to have particularly antipathy toward old women and silly old women. And at the end of this story, they are dancing in the fire like devils.
Oh, now wait a minute. You said devils. Okay.
No, not it didn't say devils. It said something else.
Prophets. Okay, there's the problem and criticism about this story is that the story slaps you on a first time reading with the final line of the story. What did they do with my book? That the three little boys are suddenly being compared to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in their in the book of Daniel, in their rebellion against King Nebuchadnezzar. She stood taut, listening, and could just catch in the distance a few wild, high shrieks of joy, as if the prophets were dancing in the fiery furnace in the circle the angel had cleared for them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are rebels. They won't do what the king wants them to do, and their death sentence doesn't work. They are protected at the end of the book of Daniel. And so here are these three bad little boys who are trying out to be the henchmen of misfit. They're bad, bad, bad. They're trying to destroy. They're trying to be as bad as they can figure out how to be. And the last sentence says they're prophets. This is the real O'Connor moment. And I have read a number of things that attack the story and say it doesn't work, because there's no way we can believe that that last sentence is really believable. You know, they're rotten little kids. They're on their way to being criminals. Don't tell me that they belong in the book of Daniel. That's too much insistence in just one line, and the story hasn't earned. I don't have any trouble with believing the line that O'Connor wrote. It makes me go back and look at the rest of this story again numerous times. What possible sense does it make to make that comparison here, and you can do it. You can find that they have little religious references in the course of the story. They have certain attitudes towards the land that O'Connor might be endorsing and saying, you know, they're right, and they should win at the end of the story. Now, another thing to point out about the final page is that you can pick the page apart and you can demonstrate, I think, that we are shifting at the end of the story more and more into the point of view of Sally Virginia Cope. And she might not be getting everything right at the end of the story. This is the little girl who feels mistreated. She's stuck in the house. These little boys are free and she's not. They're bad and they get away with it. Her mother never stops them. At the end of the story, they've been tolerated and put up with for so long that they're setting fire to the place. And why shouldn't she feel like it's something she heard about in Sunday school, that these little boys are just going to get away with everything? There is nothing they're ever going to pay for, unlike her.
I think Dick has a point to make about this
Yes.
too.
Where are you?
You got to ask you, you need to unmute, Dick. There you go. Oops. Where you see the little, there we go.
Yeah, there you did it.
Okay. Bruce, I don't mean to nitpick, but I don't understand why you use the adjective little to describe both the girl and the boys. These are not little boys. They're boys. They're little kids. But little
Oh, you
boys
just said little.
don't smoke butts of cigarettes. Little boys don't plan disaster. I've spent my life with little boys, so, some in prison, some not in prison. And I wonder if that colors your perspective in giving both the girl and the boys perhaps an aura of innocence or not knowingness that none of the four of them deserves, really.
Okay, I'll accept that. I will admit that I have a hard time paying attention to the crucial significance of age. And I have of the younger characters in O'Connor. And I accept in principle that O'Connor pays lots of attention to how old her characters are. She was taking courses at GSCW on child development and child psychology. And she was, I think, trying very hard to make age matter and to make younger characters act the way people of that age really act. And so all I have to do is think about junior high, and and I can see that boys of this age can be lots of trouble. They can be very threatening, and I think there is a threat of violence. There's a sexual threat floating around in this story. And so, yeah, the story is open to different readings, in part on the basis of the assumptions that one has about how younger characters of this age or this age or this age act. I have no trouble being corrected on that particular point. I know that I'm too open-minded to making some assumptions about that. So we can go anywhere from the young men not really realistic at all. I had a student one time who said they're leprechauns. That this is Flannery writing about her Irish heritage. Wood spirits, that sort of thing. all the way to being totally realistic, that these are boys who escaped from the west side of town prison, and they're up to no good, and they're looking for whatever they can do bad, and it is very threatening. And you know, Mrs. Cope's fear and Mrs. Pritchard's cynicism and horror are all totally justified. You know, I'd say that's an area of ambiguity that allows lots of different readings of the story.
Cheryl pointed out that one is identified as 13, and so there's.
Yeah, and I think Sally Virginia's supposed to be 12.
Mhm.
Am I remembering that right? And I think those are the years when a lot comes out. Yes, that these are bad years. Yes, I don't ever want to go back to any of those ages. Okay, where to go next? One of my assumptions, and this has changed over the years, talk about the assumptions that one makes about what's going on in the story. And I realize that lots of people disagree with me about this, is that the story, you got one story, if Andalusia Farm is being burned down at the end, and everybody's going to be killed, and you know, it's a total disaster. And you got a completely different story, and this is where I'm heading these days. You got a completely different story if they're going to go put out the fire. Mrs. Cope is going to go get on the phone, and she's going to call the authorities, and they're finally going to come get these boys and take them away. My assumption about what's going to happen at the end of the story is that the prophets are going to end up in some bad place, and their lives are going to get worse and worse, and that the women who own the farm will have the shakes for a while, but they're going to recover. They're still going to own this farm, and they're still going to be in control. Mrs. Cope is still going to be the authority figure on this farm, and she's not. The threat is only temporary. But you know, I leave it to you to decide how you feel about the end of the story. And I've talked to people today who have, you know, quite different opinions about what's actually going to go to the farm. Is some matches, you know, thrown at the trees on a farm in Middle Georgia, likely to end up producing a lot of damage. I mean, I was interested in the story Chan told about people actually having their houses burned down. But it occurs to me, well, these boys didn't head for the house. They didn't sneak up to the house at the end of the story and set fire to the house, did they? They did this other thing, which is about trying to destroy Powell's dream about how wonderful it was to be out in nature at this farm. If he'd wanted to be more effective in his attack on the women, I can tell him how to be worse.
Jean, do you want to share your comment?
Yes, I do. This story reminds me of Catcher in the Rye, written by Salinger, who was a contemporary of Flannery O'Connor. And you know, if you read Catcher in the Rye, it's all about the superficiality and phoniness of the people that Holden comes into contact with, and he himself is really alienated, you know, from the society around him. So I kind of see a kind of parallel between Catcher in the Rye and Circled in the Fire.
So maybe Powell is Holden Caulfield. I have my colleague Jordan Kofer just gave a conference paper comparing Flannery O'Connor to J.D. Salinger, and you know, and there's something to it. She read Catcher in the Rye and said she loved it, and I don't know if J.D. Salinger was aware of Flannery O'Connor. I think she longed to be the kind of writer he was, published in the New Yorker. But that was the start of the of the connection.
We have another comment here too,
Yeah,
Bruce?
what else, folks?
Yes, this is Jackie Bryan again.
Hi, Jackie.
And I wanted to say that maybe this fire is all about destroying the illusion that the boys had of this fantasy of this farm.
Mhm.
And also finally, Mrs. Cope confronting this, she carried this illusionary fear of this fire, you know, for probably her whole life. And so what happens at the end of this, the illusion of the farm for both her and Powell was destroyed by the fire. Whether the fire was put out or not, I think the fire is about the cleansing of this illusion that that all the characters have concerning this farm and what it offers to them.
Okay. Flannery O'Connor believes at the end of a short story, somebody has some of their illusions shattered. And surely in this story, it's somebody's illusions about this farm. And I would say Mrs. Cope's assumptions are being questioned, and Powell and the other boy who wants to build a parking lot, they want to get over thinking about this farm. They're kind of choosing to destroy their notions about the farm. And maybe even Sally Virginia, you know, is learning, you know, things at the end of the story. I don't know if I the farm is to her relationship with her mother. I mean, she may be finding out that she really is the same person as her mother at the end of the story, and that they're not as different as she has always assumed.
Fernanda Rossi has added something about
Yeah,
Sally
okay.
Virginia.
Fernanda, where are you? Everybody keeps moving on the screen.
She said, you know, I don't know if she wants to get on, but it says, what do you think Sally Virginia's role is in the context of the story?
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Where did you see this? Oh, Sally Virginia's role. Well, in a way, she's the main character. I mean, and she's the point of view character at certain crucial points of the story. She's trying to do the gender bending thing. She's trying to see if she can take on some of that male power. She goes out there and dresses up like a cowboy, and she's going to go out and she's on them as they're bathing. Switch the genders there, and there would be a really serious sexual threat to the story. And not much comes of it. It fails. At the end of the story, she runs back to the house as if she's totally defeated. And what she's learned is that she can't beat them. They win. I think that's in the final line about they're Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and I'm just this little girl who's still going to be controlled by her mother forever. One of the lines that jumped out at me this last time I read it, and I thought, why haven't I made more of this before? When she's watching the boys running around the field naked after they bathe in the trough, what does she look at? She watches their ribs moving freely, easily, as they breathe deeply after they have exercised by running around the field. And I think, oh, this is some of the payoff from the reference on the first page to the iron lung. The woman in the iron lung can't breathe. Sally Virginia can't breathe. She looks at Mrs. Pritchard and her mama, and she says, they are not free. They're trapped. The boys are the opposite, she thinks. They can do anything they want, and they can breathe. I don't know that she's right. I mean, I think if the story goes on at all, boys are going to lose. That, after the fire started and after the fire is put out, the old authority is going to be reestablished. It may be men who do it, but Mrs. Cope knows how to make the right phone call, I bet you, just as Regina did. And, the the authorities are going to assert their authority, and the old boundaries will reestablish, and those boys will be out of there. They'll still be nervous. People are going to learn their lessons.
We have
Maybe-
Harriet and Margaret also. I think Harriet wants to speak directly to what you were just talking about.
Harriet, yes.
So I think I have a more class and gender reading of
Okay.
the story, and I think it dovetails with yours. That is, I think about that iron lung opening as about the way in which a woman should behave. Mrs. Pritchard says, she was 4 months in there before she even got this way. And then I think about Mrs. Cope as modeling a kind of gentility in her opposition to the boys. But at the same time, the boys are maybe in the same position as Mrs. Pritchard in that they've worked, his father has worked for her, that there's a class division, and we're interested in the way in which she insists that she owns this place. And I think about their opposition having shades of that. And I do think it was focusing on the daughter who is digesting ideas about gender and class, and is also but it was also awakened at the end of the story to a misery. I'm not sure about your reading beyond the end of the text, because it seems to me that there's this kind of shared feeling that the girl has never had before, that she now sees on her mother's face, as they're both startled by the power of these boys to put them in a position where they can't do nothing. That kind of is an opposition, a position of women against a kind of misogyny.
Mhm.
And Margaret, and then Bob, I think.
I agree with
Margaret.
everything you're saying. Yeah. What else?
Margaret,
Margaret? Oh, hi, Margaret.
gonna unmute. Need to unmute, Margaret.
Oh, yeah, you're mute.
Okay. Well,
Still mute.
you lowered your hand, but you didn't unmute.
Oh, you're still mute, Margaret.
You need to press the. There you go.
I think I got it.
Now you got it.
I was just
Oh, yeah.
thinking when we were talking about comparison of O'Connor's stories. When I started reading Circle in the Fire, with the three boys coming on the property with their suitcase, the luggage, it took me back to The Life You Save, when Tom Shifless came on the property carrying this luggage, this piece of suitcase. It reminded me of, the women are always out there doing something, and then here comes a stranger carrying the luggage.
Who's never up to any good, right? Manly Pointer has a case with the Bibles. The hitchhiker, I think.
That's right, exactly.
Suitcase is a very bad thing.
So that's what I it just brought those stories with the strangers coming with something.
You think you see all these, but you start looking for what are the little motifs that just appear over and over and over and over and over in stories. And you find lots of them, and sometimes the similarities can be very surprising. And so it's a good game to play when you're thinking about, connections among the stories. We might as well admit that Flannery O'Connor wrote the same story over and over and over and over and over. But the little variations and the little surprising connections end up having more force, I think. that she gains by revising stories. She doesn't lose by using that.
And I think we'll let Bob wrap up, Bruce. If you
Okay.
have, Bob, you had something you wanted to add to it?
I
No, we need
knew-
to unmute you, but
I knew.
there you go.
I knew.
You need to press the little
you did it.
mic sign. There you go.
All right.
Hi, Bob.
Hi. One of the things that struck me so forcibly is the, in American history, we talk about the erosion of deference, which has been happening since the revolution, but that a Southern matriarch, she's not a plantation owner, but she has a big farm. And one of the ways I think in which you can maintain control is that sense of deference to an older established woman, and she got none of that from these boys. I think it must have flummoxed her a little bit that she couldn't expect that, and she didn't get it at all. So I think the story is partly about, and this is a gender role too, about the erosion of deference.
The whole history of the South, 20th century Southern history is right here, and the way the three boys from Atlanta interact with the lady with the big farm who thinks she's a big deal because she has a farm.
Yeah.
And they're not. They don't have anything. I mean, they don't give her any respect at all. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we need to wrap up, Bruce. What do you have any final words of wisdom for us?
I have more things on my list. Mrs. Pritchard is the O'Connor narrator. I will leave you with that thought. Not of this story. I mean, in general, she's somebody with a totally pessimistic, dark view of humanity who doesn't see any happy ending at the end of this story. And I'd say that's the voice that tells you most stories by O'Connor, a voice that is surprised that anything good can come out of any of these people and any of these events. That's why the stories are so shocking. It's because even the voice that's telling us the stories has a pretty dim view of humanity, doesn't expect Mrs. Cope or Sally Virginia to get any benefit out of what's happening to them at the end of the story. But I think the story does kind of insist that something good is happening at the end too. Okay, well, we ran over once again, and we will declare victory and move on, and we will be making arrangements to tear apart another batch of O'Connor stories next semester, January, February, March, April, May, June. We'll just see how long we can go on. Yeah, be on the lookout for announcements about coming attractions, but I think Tammy will be sending you reminders about events that are coming up soon, right?
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Have a wonderful holiday, Bruce.
I'm
Have a
having
wonderful holiday, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
See you this month.